compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
With the news at this time, I'm Ron Robinson. A very good morning to you, a very good day to you. First, the lead stories. Government is seeking to assure Guyanese that the Amala Falls hydropower project is above board. A policeman has been arrested because he allegedly beat a mute and deaf man. Regionally in Trinidad, two sisters were early Thursday morning burnt to death when their house was firebombed during the island-wide blackout. Barbados may be laying off workers or increasing taxes. Those are the lead stories. The details of these and other stories in a moment.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
And now the news in detail. Government's project leader for the Amala Falls hydropower project, Winston Brassington, says that the $700 million electricity project is above board. He says that the hydropower plant will be built based on the highest environmental standards and rigid international contracts. Mr. Brassington says the Guyana government will be recruiting a firm to supervise the construction of the hydropower station that will sell power to Guyana Power and Light at about 7 US cents per kilowatt.
We also said that we will have independent supervision, which will be internationally tendered to review the works that are being done. So we will hire, through a public tender, a world-class international project supervision firm to ensure that what is being designed and built is built to those standards. We also agreed that we will have an international O&M operator. So when it's built, we will have someone who will be competent to operate this.
Mr. Brassington says that the Guyana government will not be investing any money in the construction of the Amala Falls hydropower project. The Canadian company Frontera, the major partner in the joint venture with CGX Energy, has announced that it will be spending more than $100 million on the drilling of a second exploration well in the Quarantine Block. Chief Executive Officer of Frontera, Orlando Cabrales, says his company and CGX expect to spend $110 to $130 million on exploring for oil in Guyana, mainly to drill Way 1. That's Way 1. Minister of Natural Resources Vikram Bharat welcomes moves by CGX and Frontera to drill the second well after their first discovery, the Kawa 1 well in the Quarantine Block.
We have heard some good news from CGX in the Quarantine Block, which is important to us as a country because it takes development to another part of Guyana, which is very necessary too. So we look forward to further exploration by CGX in the Quarantine Block, as well as the Demerara and also Repsol. Exxon is in the Kanji and the Kaitro block doing exploration currently. So we hope that we can have discoveries in those blocks too.
Last year, the company had initially planned to spend $85 to $90 million on exploration at the Kawa well. That's the Kawa 1 well, but had later said that cost could have gone up to between $110 million and $125 million by the end of the drilling there. The Kiana Revenue Authority says it is cracking down on the trade in smuggled cigarettes and alcohol products. The authority says all importers, wholesalers and retailers of alcoholic and tobacco products must be affixed with an excise stamp in keeping with Guyana's customs law. The authority, in keeping with this regulation, has intensified its law enforcement efforts, which have led to several seizures of illegal or uncustomed brands. The authority, in its ongoing effort to tackle the trade of illicit tobacco brands, has been telling importers, wholesalers, retailers, and users of tobacco products that the legitimate imported brands which are so far approved under the Tax Laws and Health Act are Mall, Bristol, Dunhill, GT Smart, Darkies, and Manchester. The Revenue Authority takes this opportunity to reiterate its commitment of working together with legitimate importers and the general public to ensure compliance with the various tax, trade, and border laws. As such, persons and companies who may not be fully compliant are hereby urged to visit the Revenue Authority headquarters to regularize their trade affairs and become compliant, since a zero-tolerance approach is being adopted against smuggling and any form of tax evasion. Offenders may face penalties as stipulated under the laws, inclusive of prosecution. A mining pit has collapsed at Highwood Back Dam, Northwest District, killing a gold miner. He has been identified as 58-year-old pork knocker Christopher Bunbury of Pakira, Matthews Ridge, Northwest District. Preliminary investigations by the police in the region state that the southern wall of the dugout mining pit collapsed and covered the victim. He and another workmate were at the time of the incident digging gravel at the bottom of the southern wall, which collapsed. Police say his workmate, Hilton Ward, ran out of the pit and then returned with two other workmates, Paul Bunbury and Wilfred Bunbury, both of whom assisted in a search for the victim. His motionless body was found about 45 minutes after, and there were no marks of violence as were seen by police. A Guyana Police Force constable has been placed under close arrest for allegedly beating a mute and deaf man. The incident occurred on February 10th at Orangeuk in Region 8. The force says the Office of Professional Responsibility is investigating a report in which the constable allegedly physically assaulted the 35-year-old resident of Kurukabaru, who is reported to be physically challenged. Police say the man has visible signs of injuries and has received medical assistance from medics. And now for regional news. In the midst of Wednesday's blackout in Trinidad, a house was firebombed early Thursday morning, killing two sisters. Trinidad and Tobago authorities are still trying to determine the specific cause of the blackout that also affected cellular phone service. More in this report from TTT News Online.
In the midst of Wednesday's blackout, a home in Currap was firebombed at around 12:10 a.m. Two sisters, Amanda and Alicia Charles, aged 30 and 31, died. First responders to the scene were answering a call about a structure on fire located at number 60 Watt Street in Currap. When they arrived, they saw smoke emanating from an apartment building that was ablaze. A crowd of onlookers alerted responders to three people inside the burning building. The front door of the apartment was breached, and the three occupants of the apartments were brought out unconscious. The fire services and the emergency health services were contacted, and the victims were rushed to the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. Upon arrival, Amanda succumbed at 12:58 a.m., and her sister Alicia was pronounced dead at 1:43 a.m. One man, 38-year-old Fidel Guerra, remains hospitalized.
Barbadians are bracing themselves for a layoff of public sector workers or an increase in taxes. This is part of the International Monetary Fund's prescription for economic recovery of that largely tourism-dependent treasury. Already in bad shape, the Barbados economy had been further battered over the past 2 years by a significant reduction of tourists due to the COVID pandemic. Details in this report from Barbados Today.
The business community is bracing for possible public sector layoffs and or increased taxation in the new financial year. This as government pursues ambitious fiscal targets imposed by the International Monetary Fund. And the president of the Barbados Private Sector Association, Tricia Tanis, is calling on government to protect the social fabric by ensuring that the working class is shielded from the brunt of the pending adjustments. Back in December, the IMF declared that government would once again be asked to reach a 6% fiscal surplus by the 2024-2025 financial year, after relaxing its targets to provide the fiscal room to respond to the recent natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic.
It is reasonable to expect that there is going to be some degree of hardship. I believe that there will be a very strong sense that the social network must be protected in that. I do endorse the call that we may need to look and further those discussions with the IMF, see whether or not, there's opportunity to soften the expectation. I do agree, particularly there's going to be a negative impact on the social safety. But having that aside, I think it is not unreasonable to expect that there will be some adjustment. If there's revenue generation, then that speaks to tax. If there's cost cutting, unfortunately, labor tends to feel the brunt of cost cutting. I'm hoping, though, that cost cutting, before we go and look at anything other than, that anything that affects persons, because of course when you look at labor, then you're touching the social safety net, which you really can ill afford to touch at this time, given where our society. So we're hoping that there's innovations and looking at public sector reform and seeing where we can tighten without affecting labor.
That report from Barbados Today. In Antigua, the principal of the Autos Comprehensive School, Foster Roberts, is claiming that a group of students may be involved in the latest incidents of vandalism at the school campus. He is also calling for the level of security at schools to be improved. The latest incident took place sometime between late Tuesday and early Wednesday, when the perpetrators forced their way into the principal's office by breaking through burglar bars. Speaking to Observer on the grounds of the campus yesterday, Roberts disclosed that the school had previously been broken into on Sunday before being targeted yet again. Mr. Foster said the principal's office was the target of the latest break-in. While the perpetrators did not make off with anything of great value, the incident is still disappointing. Stopping short of naming names, the principal of Otto's Comprehensive School explained that several observations made in the aftermath of Sunday's break-in point to the likelihood of some students being involved. School break-ins are certainly not a new phenomenon in Antigua, with several campuses falling victim to the crime over the years. In fact, the Education Ministry was prompted to install CCTV cameras at a handful of secondary schools based on the frequency of the incidents at one point. In the Bahamas, 4 members of the police force have been charged with manslaughter. We get the latest from our news, Bahamas.
4 police officers were charged with manslaughter in connection with a killing that took place in Nassau Village on November 13th. 29-year-old Archibald Miller, 30-year-old Thomas Thurston Jr., 29-year-old Leo Dormius, and 29-year-old Kevin Greenslade are accused of causing the death of Danrico Carey by means of unlawful harm. The 4 officers weren't required to enter a plea to the charges, which stem from the decision to shoot and kill Carey as they responded to a matter at a business establishment in Nassau Village. They were granted $9,500 bail in the Supreme Court and must report to any police station with a bail management kiosk before 6 p.m. on Fridays.
That report from Our News, Bahamas. St. Martin is cracking down on illegal labor to curb high official unemployment. Daily Herald St. Martin reports that Minister of Justice Anna E. Richardson says the recent multi-agency controls are necessary. Richardson says St. Martin is struggling to thrive because of high unemployment, poor tax compliance, among other reasons. Justice Richardson said that some officers had taken videos of the recent controls in Simpson Bay to safeguard themselves on how they are interacting with people. She said that in one of those videos, a controller tells a law enforcement officer that he appreciates that law enforcement has joined the controls because the controllers were often ignored when visiting these establishments and requesting compliance. According to the judge, letters had been sent to those establishments before entering, but the businesses showed resistance because they believed that they had political protection. She said that the government must also look at businesses that do not register at the Department of Economic Affairs, do not apply for their employees at the Ministry of Public Health, Social Development and Labour, VSA, and do not ensure that workers are legal residents on the island. And now for international news, we join the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. The Russian-backed separatist administration in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine say they're ordering the evacuation of civilians after a second day of heavy shell fire across the ceasefire line with the Ukrainian army. The upsurge in fighting follows warnings from Western leaders that Russia may use an incident in Donbass as a pretext to invade Ukraine. James Waterhouse is in Kiev.
We've had what we understand to be an exchange of fire between the Russian-backed militants who've been occupying territories in the east of Ukraine, an exchange of fire between them and the Ukrainian military. For the last 24 hours or so, the Ukrainian government here in Kiev has become concerned. They've described the number of shelling attacks as unprecedented, and the West have accused Moscow of trying to generate a reason for an invasion.
The UN Secretary-General has warned that a conflict in Ukraine would have devastating consequences, adding that he was deeply concerned about heightened tensions. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Antonio Guterres said there was no alternative to diplomacy. A US official said more than 150,000 Russian troops had massed around Ukraine, calling it the most significant military mobilization in Europe since the Second World War. Meanwhile, President Putin has said he will observe military exercises involving ballistic and cruise missiles and Russia's nuclear forces on Saturday. Here's Paul Adams.
I think what's interesting, perhaps unique about the drills that the Russians have been conducting in the last few weeks is that we have rarely seen so much of Russia's military might on display in so many places at the same time, in Belarus, in Western Russia, in the Black Sea and elsewhere. So I think that's really what has alarmed and caught the attention of Western leaders, and that's perhaps precisely the intention, to show that Russia is absolutely a global superpower and that it can dictate the terms of a discussion about European security.
Police in the Canadian capital, Ottawa, have begun arresting protesters as part of an operation to end a 3-week blockade by hundreds of lorry drivers. They said in a tweet that some were surrendering. Sean O'Shea is near Parliament Hill in Ottawa for Global News Canada.
The police now trying to seal off downtown Ottawa because they're trying to stop more protesters from being able to come in on the weekends to support. They've cut off the supply lines, fuel, food, all of the kinds of supplies that these truckers need to be able to maintain their siege here in the city of Ottawa. They're starting by ringing the outside of the city, checkpoints, closing roads, not letting people in. It might take a day, it might take 2, but we're fully expecting that this operation is going to take place very shortly.
That report from Parliament Hill in Ottawa. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC. The Saudi-led coalition fighting the Houthi movement in Yemen says it's destroyed an explosive-laden boat belonging to the rebel group in the Red Sea. The coalition says it had set off from the port of Hodeidah in western Yemen. The coalition has recently stepped up attacks on Houthi targets in Yemen. The military junta in Mali has ordered France to withdraw its troops without delay. A spokesman said France had violated military accords between Paris and Bamako when it announced on Thursday it would redeploy its forces to Niger. President Macron said the withdrawal would take 4 to 6 months, but Mali said that it should happen immediately under the supervision of their forces. The World Health Organization says Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa and Tunisia will be given the revolutionary mRNA technology to set up their own vaccine production centres, helping Africa fight the COVID pandemic. Imogen Folks reports from Geneva.
The continent will no longer have to wait in line while wealthier countries buy up and hoard existing stocks. The new scheme, created jointly by the European Union and the African Union, will share the technology and the know-how to produce mRNA vaccines. The aim to have 60% of Africa's vaccines produced on the continent by 2040. Right now, that figure is just 1%.
A powerful weather system is battering Britain and Ireland with record winds, shutting down transport and schools and knocking out electricity supplies. The Met Office says one gust was measured at more than 196 kilometres an hour. One man has died in Ireland after being hit by a fallen tree. Waves as high as houses lashed the Welsh coast, while planes were buffeted by such strong winds at some airports that pilots had to abandon landings. BBC News.
Now to end the news, a look at the lead stories once again. Government is seeking to assure Guyanese that the Amala Falls hydropower project is above board. A policeman has been arrested because he allegedly beat a mute and deaf man. Regionally, in Trinidad, 2 sisters were early Thursday morning burnt to death when their house was firebombed during the island-wide blackout. And Barbados may be laying off workers or increasing taxes. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.